Hey, Calvin Ellis here for the Spinner Rack, and I'm flying solo with another episode of Comic Book Hero. I recently did a comic book show and just sharing some of the observations that I made while I was at said show. Hey, but before we go any further, again, we appreciate all of your support. So if you can please like, subscribe, everything that you know what we need to do over here on YouTube, we appreciate it. Helps us to grow what we have and bring more people in so we can give you all of that good Spinner Rack goodness that you're coming here for in the first place. So at the show, I got into a little bit of a discussion as to signed comic books over unsigned comic books. Now, for me, I thought this was a done deal, as signed comic books are more valuable. They appreciate better because you have the artist or the writer or both or everybody who worked on the comic, depending on what the situation is. These people have put their signature to it, and this makes it a rarer form, which is what comic book guys go after. However, I had a copy of Amazing Spider Man 300, the image you can see right there, and it's signed by writer David Michelinie, who is the co creator of Venom. And I automatically knew that it would not sell at the show because comic guys tend to have this aversion to having a book signed for a number of different reasons. Now, as a seller, I don't put too much more thought to it because, it is what it is. But at this show, I decided to challenge it a bit and to try to find out why the guys didn't want it. So, I would always tell them, well, look, the book is signed, and you get this look on his face like like the book had just been dipped into oil, or, somebody just scattered on it. It was perfect and now it's not perfect anymore. And again, these are books. If I offered you a signed copy, first edition of Moby Dick signed by Herman Melville, that's going to be a much more expensive book than a first edition without that signature. And comic books are still books. So the idea of it being signed isn't something that's unique to comics, with the exception, of course, of, the cover art. Whereas traditionally a hardcover book, a paperback book is going to be signed on the interior, maybe on the cover, but it's rare that I would see something like that when it comes to a book, but still books nonetheless. So in my discussion with some of the cats, what I did find is a lot of the arguments are just remarkably subjective. One person told me, well, I don't like the signature on the cover. I think it messes up, the overall art. So of course I asked, well, what if it's the interior? Is that something you would go for? No, not really. I just prefer the book unsigned altogether, which again didn't make a lot of sense to me. So, ask another guy, hey, would you prefer to have the book signed or unsigned? It's a key book. You could have it signed by Stan Lee, or you can just have it plain. I'll probably have it plain. And I couldn't nail it down until finally I was speaking with one guy, and it just rolled down. It's about the money. That's all it is. It's about the money. The guy who I was speaking with said, "Well, look, how do I know if it's a forgery? It's a if it's a forgery, I went and I spent all of this money and I don't know if the signature is valid." And I said, "Well, these are comics. It's not baseball where you can take like a bag full of baseballs. You've spent $10, you got 100 of them, and you can practice this particular signature until you get it right, and then you can put it off. It's a comic. The comic itself is going to be more expensive." And then if you mess up that signature, on a key book, you're pretty much sunk. That, and for the longest period, even to this day, you could get signatures for free with comics. The whole idea of a certificate of authenticity for me is a little bit of a graft because you're going to pay more for that certificate of authenticity. And we know, those people who are well versed with comics, that it's very easy to get the signatures that you want from creators. They're not these exclusive people that are hard to find. They do conventions several times a year. Someone like Neil Adams, who didn't give out COAs, or Jim Starlin, who doesn't give out COAs. The majority of comic creators don't do that. Frank Miller, Jim Lee, they sign, COAs. You may get one, you may not, but these guys are accessible. So the idea of forgery, again, this was the idea of giving another reason not to buy it. I don't want it because of the cover art. It's going to mess up the cover art. I don't need it on the interior. It could be a forgery. It's about the money. It's about the money. A signed book goes from the book being a $500 book to $1,000 book because it's signed, and that makes it rarer. Now, the counter to this, of course, is if you have a signed book, all of the sellers and all of the collectors too would sell that book for more money. They would not say, "Oh, it's signed," and consider it damaged. No, they would consider it signed, and so I should get more money for this book at the end of the day. So comics can be very, very subjective. And yeah, I am taking the piss out of the guys because this is one of the aspects of comics that I find a little bit frustrating, but also very whimsical and humorous at the end of the day, where it's pretty obvious why you're not going to go for it because you're going to have to pay more money for a signed book. And so there are all of these reasons that get construed to not want the signed book. But be honest. If you had the opportunity for a signed book, you're gonna take it. And you know that signed books are more valuable than unsigned books. In some cases, a book that nobody would want, a dollar book becomes a $10 book simply because it's signed. I have a whole series of Sovereign 7, that was signed by Chris Claremont. Sold it for decent money too. I already know that Sovereign 7 is not a book that I could probably sell with the same sort of energy that I did the signed copies, but the signed copies, of course, they were more attractive because Chris Claremont, the creator, was there. So, once more, just these particular observations, I find them to be, again, remarkably suggestive, but also a bit self defeating. If you're a very serious collector, you want signatures on your book. Why do you want signatures on your book? For the reason I already said. It brings more value to the book. Your collection will one day be sold. Yes, it will. Not necessarily by you, but I, who have dealt with numerous collections of people who have passed on, okay, these collections get sold. And when they're sold, it's a big difference where somebody is selling it and they're trying to get rid of it, and somebody who has a collection, and this thing is prime real estate. It's in great condition. You have signed books. They have the rare copies. They have the variants. This person really put together a top level collection. So, if you're serious about the whole thing, then yeah, you want signed books. Okay, I'm not telling you to go break the bank to get everything signed, but you want signed books. They increase the value of the collection because they increase the value overall of the book. That's just the way that it is. You shouldn't. I also think it's a very cynical approach to come into it. Well, I have a dollar amount and I'm not going over that dollar amount. That's just a poor attitude towards collecting for me. The idea would be, well, how much is the book? The book is 500. Okay, I still want the book. Maybe I can beat that price. Maybe I can't, or I'll work towards getting the money so I can get this and get it into my collection. But the idea of, well, $100 is my limit and I'm not going to really go higher than that. Well, okay, you'll have your collection, and of course, some of the books are going to appreciate, but overall, the collection is probably going to be pretty staid. It will mean something to you, and it's one of these things that doesn't mean too much when it's time to sell. And all collections get sold, unless it's something really good and it goes to the Smithsonian. All collections get sold. These are things to keep in mind for, and again, no slight when I say serious, but for the serious collector, you're really trying to build something. Signatures are a great way to increase the values of books. I do it a lot more than I used to from when I started collecting because it's a lot easier for me to access because there are more frequent shows. And it's just something that if it was another collectibles market where signatures matter like books, it's not even discussed. Okay, you go, it's a book signing, you get the book signed, the values increase. There's no argument about the book being defaced or anything of that nature. With comics, we have to remember these are still books. And if you have the opportunity to get Todd McFarlane sign a copy of Amazing Spider-Man 300, which I did, and he's signing for free, I would recommend that you take the signature as opposed to, well, it's going to deface the cover art. No, it's going to enhance the value of that book. And if you don't believe it, try it out. You can have a look at the prices and you'll see that that's the case. Now, of course, for the guy who's a comic seller, nah, I don't want the book because it's signed and it's going to be harder to put the guy, but it's harder to put off on certain guys because they don't want to pay the money for it. Now, mind you, if Amazing Spider-Man 300 unsigned at $500 is too expensive for the average guy, then a signed copy is really going to be too expensive as well. Okay, but hey, don't be averse to a signed book. Don't go for the whole certificate of authenticity route either. Most of these signatures, if not unanimously, well, I can't say unanimously, I'll contradict myself, but the large amount, and I'm talking 99.9% of these signatures, you know, are valid. Comic books are just not the market where you will see a high amount of forgeries. You will see that in other collectibles market, baseball being the highest one I've ever seen. But in comic books, the people that you're looking for are so readily accessible, and you can verify them. I mean, even the layman can verify the signature pretty easily because there's so many out there that you can actually match it against. It's just not a big deal, or it's not something that people should really address, with fear, unless, of course, you're just looking for a reason not to buy it. And that just puts yourself in the position of not building a really good collection, which at the end of the day, I think we all want. Okay, well, that's all for now. I'll catch up to everyone later. Spinner out.